Hi, my name is Cherie and welcome to my journey. I post on this channel my thoughts and things that I'm dealing with in my life. Wow, it said it's supposed to get to 80 today. I'm getting out late. It's 4:30. Okay, hold on. So one of the things that, I was contemplating today is the fact that, I have an illegal alien brother. He's a half brother, right? That, has been a resident in America for like about 40 years. Okay? His mother died when he was about 5 or 6, right? And she was here in America and had brought her son, my dad's son, with her. However, she was not legally married to my father, right? And my father was trying to figure out some kind of way how not to be a polygamist, with 2 wives. Okay? So that's how I ended up with an illegal brother here in America. When my father, had ventured into South Africa and Tanzania, he had accumulated wives while he was there. And that culture, they're allowed to have, multiple wives, right? And not so much here in America. So he ended up bringing, one of his wives with him, and then, his South African wife, she decided, to follow him, with child in tow. However, when she had got to America, she did try to establish, residency. However, she ended up getting ill. Okay? And she had, received cancer, and the cancer took her out. All right? Of course, it doesn't matter that, she had got cancer, and she decided that, she was going to have, breast implants. And we see this happening a lot with the women, especially if they had some type of breast cancer. Then they want to have breast implants or breast augmentation. And then, the cancer ends up taking them out. All right? So this woman got taken out. However, she had a 5-year-old son, right? Who is supposedly my half brother, right? So my father tried to get his current wife to accept the son, but not only was I told that, this second wife was always a thorn, in her side, but also the son was accused of being molested by her youngest son. Right? And that changed everything. This made me completely understand why she did not want, this son in her home, right? Did not want this sexual predator that had preyed allegedly on one of her children access to prey on any more of her children, regardless of the circumstances that he would be an orphan. So she basically, put her foot down and said, no, I'm not gonna take care of your son, because your son, is, a sexual predator, and he has violated, one of her children. So this caused my dad to have to separate with that wife, and now try to raise this child by himself, right? And I don't know why, my father, who is usually a very diplomatic and savvy man about bureaucracy and government, did not seek out, giving his child citizenship. And then my father ended up taking himself ill, and then ended up dying. And apparently my brother never got citizenship. Right? Because he wasn't born here in the States. He was illegitimate, and I don't know, somehow or another, the citizenship was not established before, our father died. Now, the sexual predation has caused, family members to ostracize that child, from, the family, right? The Tanzanian family, right? He's from South Africa. This other family's from Tanzania, right? So when I think of ICE, right, and I think of how seriously, countries are starting to handle illegal aliens, that they could be considered invading, a nation or a country, especially when it happens on a massive level, and that just because you're not taking it that serious doesn't mean that governments aren't taking it that serious, right? So if the country is saying turn yourself in, right, I too would say, they're saying if you turn yourself in, you have a better chance, of being deported, back to your country of origin, right? you know, probably with a condition stated to you on what you need to do in order to return, should you want to return. Okay? So, you know, what my brother ended up doing is he went underground, right? He had been living his life underground. You know, he's been having, you know, relationships while living underground, right? However, you know, now he's like a mature man. Well, not mature, but he's up in age, right? He's middle age, right? I believe he's like 40-ish, right? Give or take. He's 40-ish. You know, I want to say about 45. Maybe more. All right? But you know, my thinking is, yeah, you know, you do have a family here, right? And yes, you know, he had preyed upon, you know, the women, you know, who were, you know, abandoned to be single parents, and he lived off of them. Yes, he did. Right? And maybe he did bring something to the table, right? Companionship, a little extra money from whatever he was hustling, right? Because they hustle underground. Yeah, they got their hustles going on underground. Because they're surviving some kind of way. All right? And, you know, to do jobs where, you know, you get paid pretty much cash or by contract, okay? And, you know, that, you know, could help, you know, a woman struggling, you know, to raise children by herself, right? And maybe she doesn't consider herself raising children by herself, but she values the fact that, you know, her children might have their biological parent present above, you know, what he could bring financially to the table. Now, a lot of women, you know, they talk about that. Okay? So, because, like I said, because of the molestation, you know, the stepmother doesn't want anything to do with this other child. And the father is now dead. So, like I said, with ICE taking things seriously, right? Serious enough that they are also willing, you know, to make an ICE situation a life or death, you know, encounter, you know, that it is better, you know, to turn yourself in. Turn yourself in and try to figure out a way to either keep your family together by getting your family to also go with you to South Africa, because a lot of black people, you know, they really don't like living here in America because they have, you know, a lower status. All right? They live a life, you know, of lower status. And if you're also not only just living a life of lower status, but you're living a life of an illegal, right? You know, wouldn't your family have, more opportunity if they was to go back to Africa, right? Some people would say no, right? Because to them, it would be more important to try to gain citizenship here in America. But my thing is, yes, there are people that if they were given the opportunity to be here in America, that they would utilize the opportunity and live a better life, right? But there are a lot of people who have been living here in America, who has not taken advantage of any type of opportunities, and has taken their position of being in America for granted, right? And they would rather live the struggle life, hiding and living underground, right? But they think that they could live like that until they get caught. Then when they get caught, they don't understand that the people that are catching them are, afraid that these people are willing to kill enforcement officers, rather than turn themselves, rather than give up, rather than be deported. Very territorial in living in a territory where they're actually illegal to be in. But they like it and hate it at the same time. They've gotten used to living the life of liking and hating the life that they live. Where they can't see the benefit of going somewhere where they can actually thrive and live their life openly, having learned everything that they possibly could learn during their decades of residency in America. Now, honestly, do I think a lot of people, are choosing to go back, right? They're choosing to go back, but then, if they, disregard the fact that they were deported and that their entry, was conditional, and yet they lied and they, did whatever they did, to get back into the country, right? And we know what they would do. And they would go to, they would cross the border instead of at, a border crossing, they would cross the border illegally. Right? So that's going to compound the offense, right? Because you were deported, you went back home. They told you the conditions that must be present for you to return, and you decided, you don't have a wall that I can't climb, a wall that I can't dig under, or a river that I can't swim across, or an ocean that I can't, float into, your country. All right, let's be real. And they're going to take that as, a serious infraction. Right? So if you turn yourself in, you don't get the outcome that you wanted, right? However, I think that my brother, can, appeal to try to get, citizenship. He's been here for 40 years. Okay? He's been here for 40 years and he doesn't know anything else. He's been here since he was a child. Nobody had the funds to send him back to Africa. Nobody even knew his family over in Africa, right? My father had ventured down into South Africa, by himself. And while he was there, obviously, copulated with some of the people there, right? And this is why I keep, encouraging women to be very careful about copulating. It is not just some curricular activity. It is very serious. And if you have children, it can get real serious real quick, right? Because women can get put in jail for child endangerment, for not taking care of a child the way a child should be taken care of. And they can't say, oh, I had the child on the basis that I thought a man was supposed to support me, and they're going to say that's not written. First of all, are you even married? First of all, did you even put his name on the birth certificate? Second of all, don't you have any kind of family support from your family or his family to help you, take care of these children? Right? So that wasn't established when my father was traveling, down through South Africa and Tanzania. It wasn't established at all. However, he had wives and he had impregnated some women over there. Right? One child, she was born over in Tanzania, right? But she came over here, I think at 1 year old or something like that, right? So technically, is she American? Was she able to get citizenship? Right? A lot of people won't even question your citizenship if you're here in America and you look like you were established here. They're just going to assume. We're not like other countries where you could get stopped randomly and asked to produce your papers. Right? And people were getting driver's license, to identify themselves, but it did not necessarily identify whether or not, they were a citizen or a resident. It kind of suggested resident, right? Because it had an address on there. And people used to really come down on people for not having current addresses on their driver's license. Right? Used to come down really hard on people who, had out-of-state plates on their vehicles. Anyway, I had to go into Dollar Tree and get me some more nasal relief. And then I'll be back. But I wanted to talk about this ICE situation and how it affects me directly in my life. Right? Because of the behavior of my father, who wanted to make it seem like having sex with these women and okay, well, you had a child, like, having children is a passive event. Having children is not passive at all. It is dangerous as hell.